Welcome to SIP episode 91. This week we get into it with Kahn, proprietor of Blue Rock Vineyard way up in Alexander Valley, and this beautiful restoration project he embarked on 40 years ago. We break down Merlot. There might be an April Fool's joke, and it does tend to go a little sideways. Buckle up. You guys are in for a treat tonight. But before we begin and get to Kenny, I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the Cellar Angels world, because today we were acquired by Jeff Bezos's company, Amazon. So this will be our final sip. And I'm kidding, of course, because it's April Fool's. So no acquisition yet. I'm just throwing that out in the ether in case Jeff, even though he stepped away from day-to-day operations, wants to get a little bit better wine quality at Amazon. Please send all your letters to Ivy if you're the Amazon attorneys. I do want to talk about these Cellar Angels because you folks are the heroes here. And as I've said before, that's what we call you, angels and heroes. And heroes are the defenders and protectors of folks like Blue Rock, the limited production wineries that are working day in and day out to actually bring you some of the best wines possible. And that's why you become wine heroes and also sipsters. So now, one thing that's interesting, we started this organization in 2010, and we started it because we did not like the three-tier system in the United States. And we've gone over the three-tier system with you all in previous episodes. And today, this is not an April Fool joke. Today, one of the most powerful and longstanding and historic liquor law firm brought an antitrust suit against the two largest distributors in the United States. And according to a law firm in San Francisco that we've actually used for some of our legal requirements at Cellar Angels, and Hinman Carmichael, very famous law firm in San Francisco as it relates to alcohol beverages, they said these guys, the two large distributors, should be quaking in their boots and sweating bullets. This looks like it could be a very, very real damaging suit in the measures of billions of dollars, because there was a huge conspiracy to keep out competition. And it's one of the reasons why we started the company 12 years ago now, to help the small producers, because they're getting shut out by distributors like the two that are named in the lawsuit. Also, special announcement tonight. We announced it 2 weeks ago, but if you don't know this gentleman, you should. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Chef Jose Andres, who is actually just, this guy is a hero. This guy is an angel. He goes to every single war-torn nation on the globe, or whether it's a natural disaster, earthquake, fire, hurricane, it doesn't matter. And he and his tribe and his chefs everywhere go and feed the people displaced. They are now at the Ukraine, Poland border, feeding refugees. So as we mentioned 2 weeks ago, and it's going to continue until we build Wine Club, every single person that signs up for Wine Clubs, we're giving $50 right off the top, tasting room or library, to the WCK Foundation. We've been long supporters of theirs for going on 2 or 3 years now. We want to up the ante. We want you in Wine Club. We want to help Chef Jose. And it's just what angels do, right? That's what we do. So that is it on the announcements, except for this last one. Many of you are drinking the Blue Rock Merlot. And if you're not, sucks to be you. If you're not, you should be, because it is a spectacular wine, and we're going to get deep into Merlot. We're going to get deep into Sideways, which, fun fact, I thought was a golf movie early on, because there's a golf scene in the trailer, and things on my golf game tend to go sideways, but it had nothing to do with golf after all. But many people are wondering, how on earth do I get the Cellar Angels wines that they're drinking ahead of time? You have to go to the Cellar Angels website, grab yourself a sip kit. There you will have 4 or 5 wines for the next 4 or 5 Fridays in a row. Sometimes we taste 2 wines when we're doing side-by-side comparisons, but you will sit back, you will enjoy, you will learn, you will laugh, and it will be the most entertaining time you will ever had learning about wine, because you get to do it with the people that made the wine. So tonight, if you are tasting Blue Rock, congratulations. For those of you that are not, there are still 13 bottles left on the site. And in addition to the charity with the Wine Club that Cellar Angels is doing, Kenny is going to donate $50 of every bottle sold this evening to the United Nations Food Fund. So I would like these 13 bottles to be gone by the end of the episode. So Denise, you may have to buy 13. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get a wine in your glass before to be able to sit down and talk with someone like Kenny. And I want to, raise a glass to all of you wine heroes and all of you angels. You make this all worthwhile because we couldn't do this without you. Yes, we love great wine. We love bringing it to you. But cheers, everyone. We're on the verge of surviving a 2-year pandemic, and we could not have done it without you. Thanks so much for all your support. That is some good freaking wine. That's my clinical assessment of the wine tasting notes, GFW. Without further ado, I want to introduce a friend of the company that we were introduced by other angels, because that's what the wine industry does. They say you need to meet these people. And Kenny and I struck up a conversation with his staff, Carla, and several emails and phone calls later. And that was 3+ years ago. And it has been a wonderful relationship ever since. Been out to this property. Can't wait to be out there again in July. So Kenny, sir, it is so good to see you. And thanks for coming on tonight.
Okay. So nice to see you and Denise again. And thank you for inviting us.
Our pleasure. So tonight's episode, we want to talk a little bit about Merlot. But before we get into Merlot, I'm always fascinated by the backstory of individuals like yourself, and specifically as it relates to you. How do each of us find ourselves a Mr. Picard?
Mr. Picard. Well, first of all, I have to tell you a little bit about Mr. Picard. So I was a newlywed 42 years ago. I'm looking at, where's Cheryl, my wife? She's still my beloved. She's my wife now for the next 42 years, I hope. And we were living in Memphis, Tennessee, drinking bourbon, eating barbecue. Is like pretty, provincial stuff, like a lot of us grew up with. Knew nothing at all about fine wine. But I lived next door to Milton Picard, who we came to know as Pick. And Pick was in his 70s. Cheryl and I are in our 20s. And he had been collecting first growth Bordeaux and Burgundy. And and he knew that we knew nothing about wine. And he says, look, you come over to my house. He didn't ask us. He says, you come over to my house. It was a command. And I'm going to teach you about wine. And so we said, okay, we go over to his house. He said, Kenny, Cheryl, I want you to try this. He's got a big smile on his face. And he said, try this 1955 Margaux. What do you think? And it's like, oh, I had never tasted a great wine before. And then he really loved Cheryl a lot more than me. So the next time he'd go over, he'd open for her, try this 1961 Domaine Romani Conti. What do you think? And it's like, oh my God. So he really opened our eyes. But not only that, he changed our lives because, we were just starting our professional careers in Memphis. We were going to stay in Memphis. But because of Pick sharing with us these great wines and basically turning us on, and at the same time, because of that, we started really learning about food and making food and growing food. And, so it was wine and food. And we took our honeymoon out in California, stayed in Sausalito at the Sausalito Hotel. We took that magical drive down Highway 1 from San Francisco to Carmel. I don't know how many of you have done that, but if you haven't done it, you need to put it on your bucket list, but like sooner rather than later, because it is fantastic. And after that, we went back to Memphis and we looked at each other and we said, we didn't have any kids at the time. We're just starting our professional careers. What do we want to do? And it's like, all right, get in the car. Let's go to California. So thank you, Pick. And, when you have a great bottle of wine, yes, you want to drink it and enjoy it, but there's a real great joy in turning somebody else onto it and say, I want you to try this. It's lovely.
It's a fascinating story on half a dozen or more fronts. First of all, just the fact that he was willing to open up a cellar of that caliber to two people that were beer and bourbon drinkers and expose kind of your palates and your taste experience to something beyond anything that you could have imagined. It's the hospitality factor, which I know we're going to get into because that still rings true with you today. Yeah. And it's something, wine is to be shared. And, these people that have thousands of bottles in their cellar, they can't possibly drink them all. And I think it's something that they should invite us over and we would help them drink some of them. But It really is. It's a communal beverage. And so I applaud him. And I know he's tasting wine somewhere up in the sky
Yeah.
these days. But what a neat story to expose you, so much so that you decided, okay, we're going to go to California. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, there was a little bit more to that story because, and you may have heard this, but I looked at Cheryl, my wife, and I said, I want to go to California and make wine. She looked at me and said, I want to go to California and get away from your family.
So we call that a win-win in my family.
Oh, it was a win-win. And that was, oh my God, that was January 1985 is when we left Memphis.
Outstanding. Outstanding. And so when did you lay eyes on the Blue Rock property?
So that was 2 years later. That was 1987. So, we moved to California. We're both in our late 20s, starting our professional careers, but we're not people who had any money. And as most of you know who have visited the wine country, especially Napa, there's a lot of big money that comes in, founders of Facebook or whatever it happens to be, and and they make their stake out here. But in our case, it was just we're really kids who wanted to do this. We were wide-eyed, big dreams, but we didn't have any money. So it took 2 years. Even back then, it took 2 years to find a property. And this property was derelict. It had gone out of business. It was bonded in 1880. And the building behind you, Martin, that's the original Villa Maria winery that dates to 1880. Obviously, it's had a little bit of restoration since then. We call it a facelift or two. But Villa Maria didn't survive Prohibition. There it is when we bought it. That's a picture that I took. No roof, uninhabitable, and you saw what it looked like today. Yeah, so we actually saved the whole building and restored it like idiots, but we did it, and now we're happy we did it.
It's. I mean, this building is magical, and I know Jim has been there, Ivy has been there, Denise and I've been there a couple of times, and it's off the beaten path, which we love. And if you are there for a reason, because otherwise you're lost beyond belief. And so you definitely have to know where you're going. But to see the building that I just showed you in its dilapidated condition and envision something really takes a dreaming capacity. And were you looking at it and saying, okay, we can fix this up, I'm in love with the property? Did it speak to you, or how did that whole thing transpire?
Well, when we found the property, again, after 2 years of looking and being disappointed, because even then we couldn't afford anything in Napa. Sonoma was, not on the wine map, so to speak. It really wasn't, I would say, until the late 80s, early 90s. Sonoma didn't have its renaissance, whereas Napa had a renaissance in the early 60s because of Robert Mondavi. In the late 60s, you had Cake Bread, and all the names that we recognize started moving in. But it didn't really filter over to Sonoma until really kind of the late 80s, early 90s. So no, it was all we could afford. But when I saw it, even in its dilapidated state, the vines were gone. You could sort of see the terraces that had been, but the vines were all gone. You saw what the buildings were like. There's also a house on the property, which was in the same sort of condition as the building we just saw. But it's just beautiful, and Martin and Denise, you've been there. It's just beautiful. There's just a natural beauty. So we said, let's put our stake in the ground. And in our case, it's taken us 36, 37 years of dedication to be where we are today.
And I think what's fascinating to me is I saw an early video of you talking about the property, and you said it's going to take a lifetime to restore it.
Yeah.
And you knew that going in, and you didn't have any preconceived false expectations about, oh, we can do this in 3 to 5 years. You were willing and interested in and passionate about going, this is our lifetime project. Where did that come from?
I honestly don't know. I mean, it was just a love affair. And with me, I mean, I think it's my personality. Like when I met Cheryl, my wife, it's an instantaneous love. And we got married 6 months later, and not because, we were pregnant or anything. We just, fell in love with each other and knew it was right. So, I can't really answer that question. It was just something that I felt like I had to do.
That's awesome. And I'm thrilled you did. Quite honestly.
Well, let me tell you, we've had plenty of moments. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of money. A lot of things can happen, everything from diseases in the vineyard to, bad vendors who take advantage of you. Early on, we didn't know what we were doing. Now, I think we, after quite a few years of farming and making wine, we have some expertise. But, and then lately the fires, COVID, which shut us down from more hospitality. It just kind of goes on and on. So there's lots of things that we have to overcome. But, that's just part of the struggle. And that's kind of what makes it fun for us.
It's interesting because Lori P, hello, Lori. And I so far have been 100% at not saying last names. She has a question about where the name came from.
Thank you, Laurie, for asking me, because I oftentimes skip over it just because I forget. So when we bought the property, and we're Francophiles, a lot of vacations in Provence, the Loire Valley, Burgundy, Bordeaux, and so on. And so we started off with clo this and clo that, and it just didn't work. But all throughout the vineyard, there is serpentine rock. And serpentine rock is very particular. It's a marine rock that's very high in magnesium. The magnesium, without getting too technical, prevents vegetation, including vines, from absorbing potassium. So because of this deficit of potassium, you get vines that are really struggling. So we get pretty low tonnage per acre. As a result, as we've replanted the vineyard, we've planted it very densely with a high population of vines in order to get a commercial yield. But having said that, I do think that the serpentine rock, and of course, terroir is a lot of different elements. So the soil is part of it. The climate is part of it. The aspect, whether you're facing east or west or south, is part of it. So there's a lot that goes into the notion of terroir. And I would add to that there's a human component to terroir, because you could have, as you do in Burgundy, two winemakers side by side in the same vineyard making wine and getting completely different results. So you have to say that the human piece of terroir is something that needs to be added in. But serpentine is what we have. It is unusual. It is challenging. And that's why the land was in foreclosure, is that back when we bought it in Sonoma, if you didn't grow 5-6 tons per acre, and because Gallo was the only buyer, and it was going into hardy Burgundy, you couldn't make money. So nobody wanted the property except me. And that's because I'm a city boy who didn't know any better. And sometimes good luck is better than good looks. Even though I know I'm very good looking.
You are, but I like the rock aspect, because for the longtime sipsters, when we did Burgundy, Burgundy is famous for its rocks, and they're famous for the heat that it draws in and then radiates to the vines. You look at some of the regions on the Mosel River in Germany. They also have a tremendous amount of slate that is that imparts things into the wine. And it's funny, I was unaware of how much of an influence stone was in Tuscany until I read recently the Piero Antinori book, The Hills of Tuscany, or The Hills of Chianti, rather. Mm-hmm. And it's he goes on, and Tignanello is the flagship wine of the Antinori portfolio. Mm-hmm. And they know a thing about wine because they have 25 generations of winemakers. So they've been making wine for 640 years. But Piero talks about the land, and the Tignanello estate is the widespread presence of not just marl stone, but the herbaceous stone. The white stone exists all over the region, from the pebbles on the bottom of the Arno to the Prato Hills. The ancient Romans made lime from it. It has paved the streets of Florence. The striped Prato Cathedral is made completely of this herbaceous stone. Herbaceous stone is manganese with crystals, which is just what you said is the serpentine stone. It is an excellent friend to the grapevines. It keeps the soil clean and refracts sunlight. So they crushed a lot of this stone, sprinkled it between the vines in the Tignanello vineyard, and it keeps the vegetation down. It reflects the heat, keeps the moisture in. And it's amazing the agricultural influence of these rocks. And the city boy here had no idea, but yet fast forward 30, 40 some odd years later, it's paying significant dividends.
Well, there are a lot of people who would say that serpentine is a curse because because of the magnesium. And, you know, when you taste our wines, they have a very particular aroma and flavor and texture. And, you know, we're pretty happy with it. But winemakers have, you know, and critics will oftentimes say that, oh, the stone imparts a minerality and a flavor, but there's really no proof of that. You know, the terroir, as we talked about before, is a whole bunch of different parts that do come together, and where you grow the grapes and how you grow them does influence the aromas and flavors and everything else. But, you know, there's no proof that the stone has a particular sort of a leaching into the vines that gets into the wine. There's no proof of that, but it's subjective.
It's interesting. And I wonder how much of that is a psychosomatic influence, because you know, when you're tasting some of those crisp, acidic white German wines that are sitting on a riverbed of black slate, and you taste slate like you're licking a chalkboard type of thing. It's like, well, are you tasting slate, or are you just looking at slate and you know, projecting that? It's interesting.
It's hard to know, but it's hard to know, but it's fun to project that, right?
Absolutely.
And those wines, for example, do have, you know, special qualities that you don't get anywhere else. So it is really very site specific. So the rocks certainly do play a role. We may just not know exactly what that role is.
So we're going to talk about Merlot, but we've got to weave some sideways in here. So this movie came out in 2004, and it actually had a very significant impact on both Pinot Noir and Merlot. And while I don't know if he's on, Doug R from the Minnesota region is currently in Atlanta, I think, on some sort of a business trip. But Doug R was the correct, he is on, okay. Doug R was the correct answer. Now, interestingly enough, Doug's was the 7th answer received on the pop quiz on Monday, but the first correct one. So don't give up. Fast and wrong, trust me, I learned this through college, is not a good way to go through life. So Doug was thorough, and he actually got the correct answer. So we're going to put some points in the Doug's loyalty account. But let's go with a question here on Sideways. In Sideways, Miles' treasured bottle of Cheval Blanc was what vintage? 2019, 1982, 1947, or 1961? And there's a funny aspect about that wine that ended up on the editing room floor that most people know about. And then, Kenny, while I'm waiting for the Jeopardy music to get done, what was the career you left or pursued in California before you made wine?
I was in the investment business. And when I was in Memphis, my dad and I had, I was, you know, really just a kid in my 20s, but we started the first ever discount stock brokerage firm in the South. And then it became the first in the Southwest. And it was the early days, you know, Charles Schwab. My firm was called Kahn and Company. And so that's what I did. And then when we wound up selling that to Security Pacific Bank in California. Yes, it was like liberating. Thank you. I was 29 years old. And that's what allowed us to move. But also got to talk about Cheryl. So my wife, who's the smart one in the family, got her degree in medicine, became a radiologist in Memphis. Then when we moved to California, went to Stanford and became a neuroradiologist. So I ran an investment firm in California, in San Francisco, and Cheryl practiced neuroradiology at Kaiser out here for.
Oh, nice. Years. Very nice. All right, I'm looking at some of the chat comments, and someone needs to card Alyssa because she hasn't heard of the movie Sideways, and Ivy hasn't watched it. So the answer is, all right, congratulations, 32. We were going to send DVD copies to Alyssa and Ivy of the film. Do they still make DVDs? Martin, proving once again that he's ancient. You could actually stream it faster than I can get you a DVD. The answer is, in fact, 1961. I do like the comedian who did say 2019 because the movie came out in 2004. What is interesting in that film, other than it being a very macabre, dark comedy, the Miles says that the Chateau Cheval Blanc is his favorite wine. The 1961 is his favorite trophy bottle, and that he's not drinking any blanking Merlot. And not left on or left on the editing room floor is that the 61 Cheval Blanc is 96% Merlot. So he has a.
Is it really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, Cheval Blanc is right bank, so it's Merlot dominant. So they kind of, a little Hollywood type of adaptation with the screenplay, but it is an interesting film. I do highly recommend it. It's a good Netflix rental if it's on Netflix. Last question, poll question is this one. You have a chance for redemption. Estate fruit is more challenging than blending. True or false? Now, this question has a very specific, well, that's interesting. There's 3 answers. Apparently, I didn't delete answer C all the way. We've spoken about estate fruit in the past. We've spoken about blending in the past. Which one is more challenging? We're going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I can go either way with this, Kenny. And I especially like the 4 people that chose nothing.
Can you explain the question?
Yes, the question is the fact that with estate fruit, in my opinion, you are focused more on vintage, variances, whereas in blending, you are going after a profile from a consistency standpoint year over year. Estate fruit, it's going to be different every single year because of what Mother Nature does. Yields are going to be down. One varietal is going to be more prolific than another varietal. Who knows what's going to happen? But with blending, to me, it seems as if producers are going after a certain style that will appeal. What is your take on it?
Me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay, first of all, if I wasn't allowed to vote, but I would have voted for number 3. And I'm not being cute. I mean, because we think about this all the time, is that, there's advantages and disadvantages. So let me talk a little bit about each one. Is the advantage of having an estate is that we have control over everything that we do. So it's not outsourced to other farmers. And so we have control. So if we are really great at what we do, we have a chance to make something as good as we can make it, right? The disadvantage is that we get whatever we get from the estate. And so if you have a bad vintage or you have a fire or whatever, you are, stuck within that. Another advantage of the estate is that you have a chance to make something that's site specific. So the wine is very particular. And we do think that the Blue Rock estate wines have a very particular character. It's in the aromas, the flavors, the textures. Every year, frankly, every varietal, there's always differences, but there's also some similarities that do come from the site. Now, blending, on the other hand, gives you a chance to pick and choose from a lot of different elements that can build complexity or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. Most of those people who are not estate are trying to achieve a consistency, what Martin was talking about. And they can be pretty industrial, right? A consistency from year to year. And so the wines are much less interesting, but you can count on them to give you a certain thing.
Right.
But that's an advantage. What we've done at Blue Rock is we try to combine the best of everything. So we do make estate wines, but we blend everything. And so we, on the property, we have 40 acres planted, but we actually make 17 different fermentation lots from that 40 acres. So we're picking a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We have 6 different varietals. So we have Cabernet Sauvignon, but we have 7 different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon. We have Merlot, which we're going to talk about. We have 2 different clones of Merlot, 2 different clones of Petit Verdot. We have Cabernet Franc, which is a suitcase clone that came in from Cheval Blanc by way of a guy named Rex Geithner. I probably shouldn't say that. He could get busted.
Well, Rex has currently got an affidavit out for his arrest, but go on.
No, please don't, because our Cabernet Franc is so good. It's so good. What else do we have? We have 2 clones of Malbec, and we have the clone that we have of Syrah is Beaucastel, which is one of my favorite Chateauneuf du Pape wines.
100%. Yep. So good.
So we have within the estate a spice rack. And so because of the way we do things, we get the benefit of being an estate wine. In other words, the particular, coming from a particular place, and also coming from people who really attend it with passion and knowledge. But we also get the advantage of being able to blend and bring in, it's like a spice rack. It's like you're the chef in the kitchen. A little bit of something added can give you complexity aromatically, texturally, and also in the flavors. So I'm picking number 3.
I think it might be a little bit of both. Maybe that's what number 3 was when I set out to make it, was all of the above. Could be both of them. And to me, you hit it right on the head, because I think if you're doing 100% estate fruit, you really are. I mean, it's all you every year, regardless of what happens. You can't, you can blend your 6 varietals, but you're not going to go buy 10 tons of cab from someone else to sweeten something or do this or offset that. So you're left with, it might be a spice rack, but the spice rack has finite ingredients.
Yeah.
So, and that's a challenge. I do want to kind of circle back to the Pinot Noir aspect of Sideways. So when you think about 2004, there was actually some good that came out of the impact of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So what you had happen as a result, it wasn't a commercially blockbuster film or anything like that, but it did sort of seismically shift the wine community. And people started ripping out vineyards of Merlot and planting Pinot Noir. For the Merlot lovers, of which Mission Control and I are just huge advocates of Merlot, that was great because the price of Merlot dropped to the consumer. The net negative impact of that is they started planting Pinot Noir, and they started planting Pinot Noir in places that Pinot Noir should not be planted. And so now you have I don't know what the superlative adjective is to describe how much mediocre or poor Pinot Noir is out there, that I think you should see a corrective action at some point in time, because there's hundreds of thousands of cases of Pinot Noir being made that has no business being planted in some of these locations. And I'd be curious, Kenny, what your thoughts on that impact of the film?
Well, it's going to tie back into this discussion of terroir. So what happened is that Merlot started getting popular, and it's easy to drink, it's fleshy, so you can have it. It's easier to drink than Cabernet, but it's still a big red wine. And it's easy to say, you go up to the bar and say, hey, I like a glass of Merlot. Doesn't that sound good? As opposed to, have you got a glass of Gruner Veltliner? But anyway,
Right.
so Merlot, it was a victim of itself. It started becoming popular. And so what happened, going back to the notion of terroir, is that growers who had lesser quality land, but productive, where they could grow 6, 7, 8 tons per acre, like in the Central Valley of California, not to pick on anybody.
Yep.
They say, Merlot's popular. We can get more per ton, greater price per ton. Let's plant Merlot. And so so Merlot did itself in, because, it went from being something wonderful. Like if you ever had early bottlings of Duckhorn's Three Palms Merlot, sensational, right? But it did itself in because it just wasn't any good. But then going back to what you're saying, Martin, those same vineyards, because they couldn't sell Merlot, said, what you can do is you bud over the vine. You actually cut off the head of the vine, and then you put a new varietal. You actually graft it onto the vine. And all of a sudden that Merlot vine the next year is Pinot Noir. But terroir, again, it's the wrong place to plant Pinot. So now you've got a problem with Pinot.
Oh, that's fascinating. And we should probably do a SIP episode on grafting, because that whole process of, like you said, cutting the head off, grafting over a different varietal. So now you've got a varietal growing in a terroir area that it may or may not even do well in. And it was an economic decision. They ripped out a ton of acreages of Merlot. Aaron Pott, we quoted him in the email blast. Aaron, a very, very well-known, highly sought after winemaker. He said it actually did Merlot a favor, because it pulled Merlot out of a lot of areas where Merlot should not have been planted. And it's amazing. So Denise, Cellar Angels Mission Control is going to turn on cameras for those of you that are Zoom appropriate and want to have your cameras on. I do want to talk about Merlot and specifically the portfolio, because you have a designation in the Blue Rock portfolio called Best Barrels. Walk us through how that came about and what it means.
Yeah, so Best Barrels is, we bought the property in 1987 and planted the vineyard and sold grapes to other wineries for years. As a matter of fact, until just recently. Now everything it comes to ourselves. In 1999, I said, I want to start making wine, because we knew that we had a great vineyard. So I hired a local guy, still a great friend of mine, a guy named Nick Goldschmidt, who's wonderful. And
the Angels know Nick. Nick is coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, everybody knows Nick. I mean, he's just so fantastic. He's my neighbor now and a great friend. But anyway, so we made like 500 cases of Cabernet from the Blue Rock estate. Wow, it was really good. And in 2000, so that was 1999. Before we bottled the 2003 vintage, we only had a few barrels. We were maybe at that time making 600 or 700 cases. That's not many barrels. Maybe it's, I don't know how many, but not many. And Nick and I would taste every barrel, because every barrel is unique, even if it comes from the same fermentation tank. When you put it in barrel, each barrel really tastes greatly different. And barrel tastings are fun, educational ones, because you get to realize how much where the wood comes from and who produces it has the same impact on the wine as where the grapes come from and who produces it. So you've got another layer in there of complexity and fun, I got to tell you. Anyway, in 2003, we're tasting through every barrel, and there was this one barrel, only one barrel. And we said, oh, that is so good. What is it? It was Malbec. And out of the 40 acres, we only have 3/4 of an acre of Malbec, but it was stunning. And we said, okay, let's bottle that up for our mailing list. One barrel is only 24 cases of wine. So let's bottle it up for our mailing list. It sold out on day number 1, even though we were really small. And so that started the Best Barrel program. So it's a very simple concept. It's a very simple concept, is that in a world where someone like Glen Ellen can come out and say, we have a private reserve Chardonnay, which is 3 million cases of stuff that they're buying from all over the place. Not to pick on Glen Ellen, so don't tell anybody that I picked on them.
But Kendall Jackson does the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of wineries do, but they call it private reserve. And so it became meaningless. It was just subterfuge. It was just such a shame. So we said, look, Best Barrels is going to be a genuine reserve. It's going to be something that is as good as we can do. It's not going to be every year. It's only going to be if and when there's something that we think is fantastic. We, in the beginning, was me. Now it is really five of us who make the decisions. And it's like, just no compromises. It's as good as you can get. And so they're generally very small production. Generally speaking, they're only available through the winery direct, because they're small, and through a handful of friends like Cellar Angels. Like you're not going to find them in the local, market anywhere. But they're fun, and they can be blends. But this particular Merlot is, in fact, 100% Merlot. I want to say we don't put much new oak in our wines because we think the fruit really comes out, and there's no reason to hide the fruit.
Big cat. Sorry. Go ahead.
Cat.
Something ran across my screen when I saw something.
But anyway, so this comes, as I mentioned, I think we have 2 different clones of Merlot. I know we're going to talk about that. But, this wine, it's layered. It has great aromatics. It has length on the palate. But it has what you want from Merlot. It's not Cabernet Sauvignon. Although you could, if somebody didn't tell you it was Merlot, you might think it's a Cabernet. But
right.
It's a little bit fleshier and a little bit more approachable than a young Cabernet Sauvignon would be.
Well, and let me pause there for a second, because there's Susan J, Mike P, who I know, Frank, who I don't know, Elizabeth, who I don't know, Eileen, Alicia, Bill, thank you all for joining. And some of you, I get to see your great faces. Mr. Brent Hyman, I can say his last name now. Stop yelling at me in my ear because he has it on his picture. So clearly I can say that. That is literally the best backdrop. So that is from the movie. And Scotland and Lily, great to see you too. Because if it's Friday, sip happens. I have to do that. Here's one of the things that what you just said, I think is fascinating. It's a little bit like vintage champagne where they may not make it every year. So you have a panel of 5 people that vote on whether or not the best barrels designation can be applied.
Well, it's to be applied to the vintage, yes, but to a particular wine, to a particular varietal, or perhaps a blend of varietals.
Okay. And you'll be able to see it on the back of the bottle because it does say best barrels Merlot and or best barrels Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc. So you have 2 clones of Merlot. And for those that are new, give us a quick definition of a clone.
So a clone is a subset of a varietal. So so let's just take it, you got the rootstock of a vine, which are engineered, if you will, throughout time to be resistant to diseases or to be tolerant of soil conditions like, let's say, a high salt condition or a high magnesium or something like that. Then either in the nursery or in the field, we would graft on the scion. You've probably, S-C-I-O-N, French term, you've probably seen that before. The scion is the varietal that's growing on top. So
Okay.
the varietal is what it is: Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Merlot, whatever it is. Then within the varietals, you have a subset, and that's called the clone. And so what happens is that in the field over time, you get mutations. You get all kinds of mutations, but what will happen is that the Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, we have 7 different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon. I mentioned 2 clones of Merlot, is that it will morph in that, because in the field, birds will eat one and then they'll poop out the seed and that'll grow and, stuff happens, right? Where all of a sudden you get something that is the same varietal, but it's a little bit different. But those little differences really add up to big flavors and big aromas.
Very much so. And so I want to get into this Merlot in particular. And
Okay.
you got to taste, some great Merlots back in the 80s with Pick.
Yep.
You have then tasted a variety of Merlots through obviously your business career and entertaining and those sorts of things. So when you're producing Merlot, what are some of the characteristics that stylistically you want to have evolve in the bottle, ultimately the glass, and then have the consumer enjoy?
Well, I think the main thing with Merlot is textural, in that it is a thinner skinned grape than Cabernet Sauvignon, and it gives a little creamier texture, softer texture. And which is why it's used for blending. Like if you think of Bordeaux, in the left bank of Bordeaux, which is Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Saint-Estèphe on the left bank, Cabernet Sauvignon dominates. And then you'll have smaller amounts of Merlot and then really small amounts of Cabernet Franc. And the function of Merlot, it's really twofold. One is that it is an earlier budding varietal. So earlier in the spring, it starts to produce earlier, and Cabernet's later. So if they have a frost, it might wipe out their Merlot, but not the Cabernet Sauvignon. So part of it is just, they didn't want to get their whole crop wiped out. But a bigger part of it is that Cabernet Sauvignon, especially from Bordeaux, and especially in older days when it was much colder, it's really lean and hard. You talk about having to put it in the cellar for 20 years. And so what Merlot would do is texturally, blended with Cabernet Sauvignon, it would soften it so that you didn't have to wait 20 years. Maybe you had to wait 10. That was the role. Now, when you go to the left bank, Merlot plays a different role. So we're talking Saint-Emilion, but in Pomerol,
Right
Merlot
bank.
is the dominant. Yes, I'm sorry, on the right bank. Thank you. On the right bank. So in Pomerol, Merlot is the dominant grape. Now, for those of you who watch Sideways and don't like Merlot, let me just tell you a little secret, is that the most expensive wine in the world is not Gruner Veltliner, let me tell you. It's Merlot Boost. It's Petrus, right? So Petrus is mostly Merlot with a little bit of Cabernet Franc blended in.
And you could probably go down that list because you've got Petrus, you've got Le Pin, you've got Cheval Blanc, and they're all Merlot dominant. Then you throw in some of the DRCs, and depending upon the vintage, you've got Pinot Noir, which jumps into the top 5 or so as most expensive. But yes, it is incredible that Merlot really tops out as some of the most expensive wines. It's just such a seductive grape. It has that allure, the nuance, the texture, the layers, when done appropriately and done right, and it's a good vintage, that I think is unmatched. But when it's done wrong or in poorer vintages, you do get that vegetal characteristic. You get that early ripening green pepper, and it's sometimes off-putting. And so it is amazing when you can taste them side by side and taste one that is just decadent, and it'll stop you in your tracks, and you will understand the allure of Merlot.
Yeah. Going back, I'm glad you said that, because going back as a farmer, because we do all of our farming, and that's really my principal role, is that Merlot is a pretty vigorous variety. So it likes to grow. And if you're growing it in soils that are a little bit too rich, where it has access to too much soil, too much nutrient, too much water, it grows too much vegetation, and you do get those sort of off-putting vegetal aromas and flavors that you don't like. So again, it goes back to terroir. So Merlot is just not happy in vigorous soils.
Interesting. And I do see Kent. Kent, that is actually also a very good screensaver back there. Lori, I haven't seen. Frank, good to see you. I know. I'm jealous. I'm looking for the invitation. The postal system is so bad these days. Larry Rowe, ladies and gentlemen, whose name I can also say is the owner of Grayscale, who will be coming on in a couple of weeks. And Jeff and Jane, it's good to see you in a familiar environment that is not on the road. So I'm curious, Kenny, out of all the wines that you make, I'm going to ask you the difficult question.
Okay.
Is there a favorite?
It's kind of like if you have children and somebody says, "Who's your favorite?" It just depends on who's behaving or misbehaving at the time. Because it really does depend on my mood. I mean, we make 13 different wines, but we don't make them just to make them. I mean, we won't make anything that we don't think is really up to our standards. Mm-hmm. But there are times when an inexpensive wine like Baby Blue Blanc, which is Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Viognier. That's my favorite wine if I'm sitting out by the swimming pool. If I'm having, spicy food, I certainly wouldn't want to have Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right.
Of the reds, boy, that really is a tough question. And I'd have to say it's probably the Cabernet Franc. I do love the Merlot. I don't know, our best barrels Cabernet Sauvignon. That's a real tough question.
Yep. Hey, Delia and Mike, the pyrocene question. Yes, that is correct. And it depends upon if that's native to the varietal, where that might be one of the flavor characteristics of said varietal, or if it's planted in an area and it was a less than ideal vintage and it was harvested earlier, that would impart that to where it's not a desirable green pepper flavor. It's more of an off-putting, masking. It's not, you smell it immediately when you're like, oh, okay, it's too powerful. That's more the off-putting pour. Sometimes Cabernet Franc has it. Certainly from South America, you can taste it in that capacity. It was a marker for us for a long, long time. It's like, oh, this is a South American Cab Franc, because they didn't just get the temperatures that they needed to get a full harvest in that capacity. But that's a great question, because some of the green components, who just said that? Ivy, some of the green components are very good.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in on that for a
Please.
second. That yes, because what growers around the world are learning is how to reduce that undesirable character, and it's reduced in the vineyard by, let's say, less irrigation, more leaf pulling, which allows more light on the fruit, and higher ripeness, which to me gives you also a negative of higher alcohol, but it gets rid of that veg. But I think it was Denise and Mike who had made the point of, yeah, but a little bit is really good. And it is like being a chef in the kitchen, right? Rosemary is one of those things that a touch, where it's like, oh, there's something in there that's really wonderful, but you can't say it's rosemary, right? It's wonderful, but once you overdo it, it's not wonderful. And so, yes, I agree. And if you think Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, which is half Cabernet Sauvignon and half Sauvignon Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc, all of those varietals do have an herbal component. But when grown in the right locations and made right, it's like that rosemary that's done right. It's a little bit there, it gets complexity, it's wonderful, but not overpowering.
No, and it's funny you talk about rosemary, because I think another great analogy to that is the bay leaf in the stews. I always question, it's like, why would you only put in one bay leaf? This is fantastic.
I love bay leaf. It's one of my
let's
favorite
put in like
spices.
3 or 4 more of these, and then 3 or 4 more of those. And it's like, who let Merton near the bay leaves? That's bad. So I'm with you on that. Let's go to my favorite part of the show. For those of you that are new, we want to show you where Blue Rock is. I'm actually surprised this wasn't prompted earlier by a certain duo that's sitting on a couch. They're a little fatigued. They've traveled 50,000 miles in the last 6 months. So Cellar Angels is a direct-to-consumer company, as I mentioned at the top of the show, that was founded in 2010. Direct-to-consumer means there is no distribution. You won't find these wines on store shelves. And we focus on one region and one region only, and that is Napa and Sonoma. So this is our playground. And it's a magical playground for a variety of some of the things we've actually been talking about. First of all, Kenny has mentioned repeatedly terroir. Well, this has got some of the finest terroir in the world, because it is what is referred to and defined as a Mediterranean climate. There's only 3% of the globe that has a Mediterranean climate. And not shockingly, most of it surrounds the Mediterranean. But what that does is here in Napa and Sonoma County, you get a predictable amount of rainfall for the most part, and calendar of when these things are going to happen. Allegedly, up until the last 15 or so years, you would get your rains early in the year, in the January, February timeframe, and then you would have a slower, longer ripening season, and then you would have bud break. And as we heard a couple of weeks ago, bud break is happening now, which is early, which is scaring quite a few people because it's getting warmer faster. But this is this region here. So you've got Napa County, you have Sonoma County, and you can see the maritime influence. So here we have the Pacific Ocean, we have the San Pablo Bay. Right here to this valley, we've got the Russian River. You've got Lake Hennessy over here. There's 6 other rivers in Napa. There's at least 6 or 8 in the Sonoma County. And you will not find a wine region in the world of status that does not have a maritime influence. Even Bordeaux, even the Rhone. We talk about the Nicaraguan or the Nicaraguan area in Canada. Every place has a maritime influence. It has a huge influence here. We've talked about the Petaluma Gap. We'll get into it more. We didn't talk about the Italian colony, which is Asti, which was formed very near Blue Rock in 1888 or somewhere thereabouts, very close to the Italian immigrants formed this area here, and we're producing wine. But Blue Rock is a little bit up valley from there, or I'm sorry, down valley.
Down valley, yeah.
And so here you have this beautiful, idyllic vineyard setting that's, as I mentioned, it's hard to get to. You do think you're lost. Arriving at night is a challenge, but there is great signage. I will tell you that much. That is fantastic. Great signage. And as you spin around and get closer to the farm property that we looked about, the house behind me and stuff like that, you can see this house right here, which is the tasting room, production facility, just about everything happens here. This is Jim's favorite area. Where'd it go? There it is, the bocce ball court.
Oh my goodness, you really got this. The
Yes.
bocce dates to 1880 also.
That's where Jim and Ivy hustled us, because I didn't know Jim was in a league prior to the wager. That would have been good news to have up front. But this is a pretty special place. You come down this road here, which is a one-way, thankfully, and then you pull in, tasting room, parking lot up here. The thing that I want to emphasize is absolutely, we're going to get into how do you taste at Blue Rock. It's 100% by appointment, but it's not just by appointment. Not anybody can call Blue Rock and actually set up an appointment. And it's not a tasting where you walk up to the bar and someone fills your glass with some Sauv Blanc and gives you a splash of this and talks to you about that. No. It's a hospitality experience that you're going to want to write home about, and talk to us, Kenny, about why hospitality is so important to you.
It's because, well, number one, we really enjoy hospitality. So at first we were wine, then we were wine and food, and now we're wine, food, and hospitality. So that's what we do. But hospitality is about, connection. Drinking a bottle of wine it can be wonderful. You can say, oh, this is a wonderful wine, but it's such a big level up if you have some greater connection, a connection with the people who made the wine, who grew the grapes, with the property itself, where you actually get to see it, smell it. If you come visit us, maybe you'll have lunch with us, because we have a fantastic food program. But it becomes so much more meaningful when you actually visit the property and visit the people who have made it. So that's why hospitality means so much to us.
And there is, Phil and Debbie, I forgot to say hello. Hello. And when there's a few olive trees on the property, how many?
Quite a few. I would say, I haven't counted, but I'd say 350, 400. Some of them are ancient. They date to the original Italian settlers who came in 1880 and planted them, and they still produce. But then we planted, I would think I planted maybe another 350 olive trees, but I actually sourced the genetic material from Lucca, Italy, from a friend Toyo in Lucca, Italy. And we had a local nursery grow little 1-gallon pots, little 1-gallon baby olive trees from that genetic material. We planted them, waited 15 years, and now we make a wonderful estate olive oil.
I will vouch for that, because it's on our table every evening, the Blue Rock olive oil and the Blue Rock balsamic.
So you have the balsamic too. Good. So
yes.
The balsamic, we actually source that from Modena, Italy. So it's an aged balsamic vinegar, but it's the real thing from Italy, and it is wonderful. We put it on
Mike, with the Blue Rock on the pasta this evening. Very nice.
Yeah, there you go.
We had lunch a few weeks ago, expensive but great, prepared by a visiting chef at Blue Rock. Doug? Kenny, invitation open to host a wine tasting at Sean's house in Colorado.
Well, we do in-home tastings. We really do. And Carla, my partner, is coming to Colorado. So shoot me an email. It's Kenny, Kenny, at Blue Rock Vineyard, singular.com. And just let me know the context that we met through Cellar Angels and so on. And no, we do in-home tastings, and they're really fun. And the only thing we ask is, bring your wine-loving friends who want to meet us and buy wine. And we'll make it a great evening. We'll bring the wines. It'll be fabulous.
It's a simple ask. And quick story, Sean and Marilyn were the ones, I think, 4 some odd years ago that introduced us to Kenny and Carla, the dynamic duo of Blue Rock. And we have been forever in their debt since that point in time. So I don't know if anybody has any final questions. There's some more Merlot here that I'm going to consume. I don't know if Lily just raised her hand or was brushing blonde locks away, that you have to, at least Scotland, at least she's not watching The Bachelor this week. I mean, there is that. It's all good. Angels, I want to
I feel
thank you.
attacked, Mark.
No,
I'm
no.
kidding. I'm kidding.
If there's an attorney in the house, Scotland, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I might need some defense.
I would
It's
like to
all
say
good.
one, I'd like to say
Yes,
one
please.
last thing, if
Kenny,
I
go
may,
ahead.
is that you mentioned earlier is that, the tasting experience at Blue Rock, it really is wonderful. And it is by appointment, but it is also by referral. So, those of you who want to come and visit us, I know people go to Napa, but, once you've been to Napa, come to Sonoma. It's really different. It's a lot of fun. It's very interesting because it's not just Cabernet. We would love to have you. Send us an email, but let us know that we met you through Cellar Angels, and then we're going to find you a spot so that you can get in and do a tasting, maybe have lunch with us and have a wonderful time.
Yeah, it's one of those places that you're going to want to probably allocate 3 to 4 hours, because you're just sitting there and you're enjoying everything, the scenery behind me. You take a walk on the property. There is a bocce ball court, and I would replane that because Jim apparently found some sort of curve that I didn't know was there and leveraged that and took a lot of money off me, which was shocking. Teasing, but there is going to be a rematch. But it is a special place, and I think what makes it special is the terroir aspect that doesn't get spoken about, because I think there's an ingredient in terroir that no one mentions, and that's the people that are working the property that are there. And it is, yes, there's the slope, yes, there's the serpentine rocks, yes, there's the topography, all of that makes a difference, but the people actually are the reason that we gravitate to these facilities, and yours is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because it's just you, Carla, and team are amazing. Next week, Angels, we've got Barry Waite from Tamber Bay, and another perfect example of someone that understands hospitality and works their tail off. But I want to thank all of you for last week letting me take the week off for my birthday. It was fantastic. Went down to Key West, saw some place called Hemingway's house. Apparently he wrote some books. That was pretty interesting. I'm sorry. And I did hear from a lot of sipsters. It was very impressive. You guys are either really bored or really enjoy great wine and having a lot of fun. So for that, I'm heartfelt thank you. I missed you guys. It was a lot of fun, but I missed you all. So I will see you here next Friday. Glass tip to Kenny, who took some time out this evening to share some fantastic wine with us. Larry, we'll see you soon. You guys, please be good to one another. Drink some of the good stuff. And thanks so much for spending some of your Friday night with us. Cheers.
Pleasure being with you all. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.